Most men believe attraction is created through effort. They think the more attention they give, the more available they become, the more they prove their loyalty, affection, and emotional investment, the more valuable they will appear in the eyes of a woman. But reality tells a far darker story, because if effort alone created desire, the most devoted men would never be abandoned. The men who text back instantly would never be ignored. The men who sacrifice everything for love would never be replaced by someone colder, calmer, and emotionally harder to reach. Yet this happens every day. And Niccolò Machiavelli understood why centuries ago. He understood that human beings do not simply respond to kindness. They respond to power, emotional leverage, uncertainty, and perceived value. The less a man emotionally depends on a woman, the more psychological gravity he carries. The less he needs reassurance, validation, or constant closeness, the more his presence begins to feel rare, powerful, and difficult to replace. And tonight, we are going to uncover the uncomfortable psychological reasons why emotional independence makes a man magnetic. We will expose the hidden dynamics most people never see inside attraction, attachment, and desire. But stay until the very end, because the final principle reveals the darkest truth of all. The moment a man genuinely stops needing validation from women, the entire dynamic changes forever. And once you understand this, you will never see relationships the same way again. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. These videos are not about superficial dating tricks or manipulation. They are about understanding the deeper psychological structures that govern attraction, power, emotional control, and human behavior. If you are tired of surface-level advice and want to understand the hidden forces shaping relationships, you are in the right place. Now, let us begin. Machiavelli once observed that familiarity breeds contempt. What becomes constantly available eventually loses psychological weight. Human beings are strangely wired in this way. We often undervalue what is guaranteed and overvalue what feels scarce. This principle does not only apply to money, status, or opportunity. It applies most intensely to attention and emotional availability. The modern man has been taught that love requires endless reassurance, constant pursuit, and emotional overexposure. He believes that if he gives enough, sacrifices enough, and proves himself enough, he will become impossible to lose. But paradoxically, excessive emotional availability often destroys attraction instead of strengthening it. Why? Because constant availability communicates something beneath words. It silently says, "My emotional stability depends on your response." And the moment another person realizes they can control your emotional state through attention, distance, or validation, the balance of power quietly shifts. Machiavelli understood this deeply. The individual who depends less emotionally always possesses greater leverage in social dynamics. This is not cruelty, it is psychological reality. The less a man needs external validation, the more internally stable he becomes. And internal stability is one of the strongest attraction signals in human psychology. Think carefully about the men. Women often describe as unforgettable. Rarely are they the most agreeable or emotionally dependent. Usually, they are calm, composed, difficult to manipulate emotionally, deeply focused on their own mission, and psychologically self-contained. They have their own world, their own purpose, their own direction. Their identity does not revolve around female approval. And this independence creates emotional tension. Because when a woman senses that a man's happiness does not depend on her validation, she begins to wonder how valuable she truly is in his world. Her attention shifts from being pursued to wanting to earn significance within his reality. Most men never realize this because they confuse attachment with attraction. Attachment is comfort. Attraction is tension. Attachment seeks security. Attraction seeks emotional polarity, curiosity, and psychological intrigue. The moment a man becomes overly predictable, overly available, and emotionally dependent, he unconsciously removes the uncertainty that fuels desire. The brain no longer needs to invest energy wondering about him because he is fully exposed, fully guaranteed, fully emotionally surrendered. Machiavelli repeatedly warned against predictability because predictable people are easy to control. A predictable man reacts instantly. He becomes anxious when ignored. He seeks reassurance after every disagreement. He over-explains himself. He chases emotional clarity because silence makes him uncomfortable. And every one of these behaviors communicates the same underlying truth. His emotional center is externally controlled. He does not govern himself. He is governed by the reactions of others. But the emotionally independent man operates differently. He does not rush to fix every emotional discomfort. He allows silence to exist without panic. He does not seek validation through constant communication. He remains emotionally composed even when uncertainty appears. And this composure creates a strange psychological effect. People begin investing more energy into understanding him because he is no longer emotionally transparent. His calmness creates gravity. This is where many people misunderstand Machiavellian psychology. They assume emotional independence means becoming cold, toxic, or manipulative. But true emotional sovereignty is not about punishing others through distance. It is about refusing to abandon your self-respect in exchange for approval. The sovereign man is capable of love, affection, and intimacy, but he does not lose himself inside them. His emotional world remains internally anchored. He chooses connection without becoming emotionally enslaved by it. One of the greatest psychological mistakes men make is building their identity around being chosen. They unconsciously believe that female approval determines their worth, and because of this, they begin negotiating their dignity for attention. They tolerate disrespect. They chase inconsistent behavior. They overinvest emotionally before trust is earned. They sacrifice their mission, boundaries, and standards to preserve attachment. But the more they do this, the more attraction quietly dies. Why? Because desperation is psychologically repellent. Human beings instinctively sense emotional hunger, and emotional hunger creates pressure. The desperate man unconsciously communicates fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough. His behavior becomes reactive instead of grounded. He seeks emotional security from another person instead of generating it within himself. And the nervous system detects this immediately. The emotionally independent man creates the opposite effect. He does not fear solitude because his life already has meaning beyond relationships. He is focused on growth, purpose, discipline, and self-mastery. His emotional state does not collapse because of delayed replies or temporary distance. He remains grounded regardless of external fluctuations. And paradoxically, this makes his attention more valuable because it is given by choice, not by emotional need. Machiavelli understood that people value what appears difficult to control. The less emotionally reactive a man becomes, the more psychologically significant he appears. This does not mean suppressing emotions. It means mastering them. There is a profound difference. Emotional suppression creates numbness. Emotional mastery creates stability. The sovereign man feels deeply. but he does not allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent behavior. Modern relationships often collapse because people confuse emotional intensity with emotional depth. Intensity is chaotic. It thrives on volatility, reassurance loops, emotional highs and lows. But depth is calm. Depth is stable. Depth does not constantly seek stimulation because it is rooted in internal security. The emotionally dependent man becomes addicted to emotional intensity because he mistakes it for connection. He constantly seeks validation, reassurance, and emotional drama because silence forces him to confront his own insecurity. But the emotionally sovereign man is comfortable in stillness. He does not need constant confirmation to feel secure. He trusts himself, and this self-trust changes everything. Because once a man genuinely values himself, independent of female validation, he stops performing for approval. He stops chasing reactions. He stops reshaping his personality to avoid rejection. He becomes authentic, and authenticity is magnetic because it is rare. Most people are performing versions of themselves designed to maximize acceptance. They hide their opinions, suppress their boundaries, and dilute their identity to avoid disapproval, but the sovereign man no longer negotiates who he is for emotional comfort. He speaks honestly. He walks away from disrespect. He remains calm under pressure. And these traits create psychological weight because they signal inner authority. Machiavelli believed that authority begins with self-governance. A man who cannot control his emotional impulses becomes vulnerable to manipulation. People quickly learn how to influence him through attention, affection, distance, or emotional tension. But the emotionally disciplined man becomes difficult to manipulate because his reactions are measured instead of automatic. Silence no longer controls him. Withdrawal no longer destabilizes him. Emotional games lose their power because he refuses to participate in them. This creates a dramatic shift in relationship dynamics. Suddenly, the woman can no longer predict his emotional reactions with certainty. She no longer feels complete emotional control over his attention. And uncertainty increases psychological investment. The human mind naturally obsesses over what feels emotionally unresolved or difficult to fully possess. This is why emotional independence often intensifies attraction. Not because the man is manipulating anyone, but because his self-sufficiency removes emotional predictability. There is another uncomfortable truth Machiavelli understood. Many relationships are built less on genuine connection and more on emotional leverage. One person chases while the other regulates attention. One overinvests while the other maintains emotional control. The imbalance itself sustains the dynamic. But when the emotionally dependent person suddenly becomes internally stable, the structure destabilizes. The old patterns stop functioning. This is why people often become more interested in someone after they emotionally detach. The nervous system interprets lost emotional control as increased value. Curiosity rises. Attention intensifies. The person who once felt secure in the dynamic suddenly begins investing more energy because the emotional certainty has disappeared. Again, this is not about manipulation. It is about emotional self-respect. The sovereign man no longer sacrifices his peace to maintain unhealthy dynamics. He no longer chases inconsistent behavior. He no longer argues for his worth. He simply observes actions and responds accordingly. If respect exists, he remains present. If disrespect appears consistently, he withdraws calmly without emotional chaos. This calm withdrawal is incredibly powerful because it communicates abundance. It says, I value myself enough not to remain where my presence is not valued. and people instinctively respect individuals who maintain standards without emotional desperation. Boundaries create value because they communicate self-respect. Most men fear losing women so intensely that they abandon their own standards completely. They tolerate manipulation, disrespect, dishonesty, and emotional inconsistency because they fear solitude more than dysfunction. But this fear destroys attraction because it reveals internal weakness. The moment a person senses you will tolerate anything to avoid losing them, your perceived value collapses. The sovereign man understands something different. Loneliness is temporary. Self-betrayal is permanent. He would rather lose a relationship than lose his dignity. And paradoxically, this willingness to walk away often strengthens attraction because it communicates emotional abundance rather than scarcity. There is also a darker layer to this dynamic. People often test emotional boundaries unconsciously. They withdraw attention to see who chases. They create tension to see who panics. They delay responses to measure emotional dependence. The man who reacts impulsively fails these tests immediately because his behavior communicates emotional need, but the man who remains composed passes them naturally because he refuses to abandon his self-respect for reassurance. Machiavelli would argue that emotional discipline creates freedom. The moment your happiness no longer depends entirely on another person's attention, you reclaim psychological power. You stop living reactively. You stop over-analyzing every interaction. You stop seeking hidden meanings in temporary silence, and this freedom transforms your entire presence. Suddenly, your energy changes. Conversations become lighter because you are no longer seeking emotional guarantees. Attraction becomes natural because you are no longer forcing outcomes. Relationships become healthier because they are built on mutual choice instead of emotional dependency. The sovereign man does not chase because he is already fulfilled. He does not beg because he already values himself. He does not panic at uncertainty because his identity is internally anchored. His emotional world is governed from within. And people instinctively feel the difference between a man who wants connection and a man who needs it for survival. One radiates calm power, the other radiates fear. Machiavelli understood that human beings rarely admit how deeply they respond to emotional power dynamics. People speak about love as though it exists independently from psychology, status, and emotional perception, but behavior consistently reveals otherwise. The individual who remains emotionally grounded, internally fulfilled, and psychologically difficult to destabilize naturally commands greater attraction and respect. He stands grounded in his own identity. And once a man reaches that state, something extraordinary happens. He stops chasing love, and love starts chasing him.